A weekend at the lake was supposed to save our marriage. Instead, it unraveled everything I thought I knew about her, and about the life we shared. And then, she was gone. People say a lake is just a mirror turned down. They don't tell you what it remembers when no one's looking. My name is Owen Hale. I'm 38, a civil estimator by trade, which is a fancy way of saying I'm paid to guess how much the ground will cost to argue with. Numbers calm me. Dirt does not. Maybe that's why the house by the lake felt like a deal with both. A spreadsheet that breathed. My wife, Mara, called it a reset. Just 1 year, she said, fingers resting lightly on the listing photo. The way you touch a hot plate, you know you're going to buy anyway. We fix it, we rest, we figure us out. The lake was 2 hours north of the city, a long, narrow body of water that tried to pass for a river until you saw how patient it was. In the mornings, mist sat low like a cat refusing to move. The house itself was a cedar-sided 2-story with a porch that leaned but didn't complain, a private dock whose cleats had opinions, and a boathouse with a padlock that looked decorative until you put a key in it and felt the way old metal resents being remembered. We closed in March and moved the first weekend of April, which is a ridiculous month to start a life next to water. The wind still had winter's voice, and the yard still believed in last year's leaves. Mara wore a wool hat, and the expression she saves for museums, alert, appreciative, ready to fall in love on schedule. I carried boxes. She pointed and planned, humming something under her breath that I couldn't place. We said brave things to each other like, "This is going to be good," and "We're going to make it ours," and meant them, which is the only way those sentences work. There's a thing I didn't tell anyone because it sounded small enough to ignore. The first night, when we finally sat on the floor with grocery store sushi and the cheap wine we keep for ceremonial optimism, a car stopped at the end of the driveway. No one got out. Headlights washed the trees for a count of 8. Then the car reversed and left like a thought that decided not to become a decision. I pretended I hadn't seen. We learned the house by its noises first, the way the furnace exhaled, the porch sighed, the far bedroom floor apologized when you walked on it. The lake had its own vocabulary, loons like a broken laugh, the slap of water against the dock posts like polite hands trying to be heard. At night, winds slid along the siding and made the house sound like it was learning to breathe through better lungs. By the second week, we had a routine. I logged into jobs and budgets at the little desk by the front window. Mara drove into town to the community clinic where she'd picked up shifts. She said she liked being needed by people who looked her in the eye when they said thank you instead of clicking a smiley face rating on a screen. In the afternoons, we worked on the house together, sanding, patching, pretending we knew what we were doing. She painted trim with a steadiness that made me watch her more than the wall. On Fridays, we allowed ourselves the small joy of driving to Hannon's for fried fish and free vanilla pudding. The second Friday we went, the woman at the counter said, "Good to see you again, Lena," to Mara, with the easy familiarity of someone greeting a regular. Mara didn't correct her. She smiled back like the name fit fine, then took our number card and slid into a booth like a person who expects to be expected. "Lena?" I asked later, in the truck. "The owner's daughter," she said. "I remind her of someone. You know how people are, they try names on." Did the name fit? I meant it as a joke. I heard my own voice and didn't like it. She shrugged, pulled her hat down over her ears. "It's a lake. Everyone's someone else here for a while." There were other small things. A folded paper stuck into the doorframe of the boathouse that said, in a quick hand, "Wednesday sundown, anchor by the cove." The anchor was on a shelf inside the boathouse, next to a coil of nylon rope that looked recently bought. A spare key to the house I didn't recognize, hidden under the third porch board, the one with the knot. A metal tag in the junk drawer stamped R14 like it expected me to know where it belonged. One afternoon, while we were cleaning out the pantry, Mara found a small black notebook tucked behind a shelf bracket. It wasn't the previous owner's grocery list. Too neat, too deliberate. On the first page, in narrow, tidy script, if the water is flat, bring the lantern. If the water is loud, stay home. Below that, lines of dates and names and numbers that didn't look like money. She closed it quickly, the way you shut a door to a room with a strange smell. "What is it?" I asked. "Nothing," she said, and slipped the book into a tote. Later, when I checked the tote, it was gone. I didn't ask twice. At the time, I considered that a kindness. Now I think it was something else. People were kind, of course. That's what lake communities do in the first month you exist. They bring jam, maps with circles on them, advice about septic tanks that sounds like religion. A man named Reed, who lived 3 houses down, helped me wrestle a new refrigerator into a kitchen that resisted the idea. He had the calm squint of someone who knows how to get a boat onto a trailer in crosswind. He also knew exactly where our breaker box was without asking. "Been a few versions of folks in this place," he said, cheerful without being invading. "You'll like it here if you like it here." Mara liked it here. She took dawn walks with a thermos in one hand, the other tucked into her coat pocket as if she were making deals with the cold. I'd watch her from the window, the line of her small against the gray, and feel both grateful and something like left behind, which makes no sense when you are warm inside a house you bought together. The first time I knew there was a hidden chapter in our book was the day the lake said her other name out loud. She was on the dock, crouched, tying a strange knot I know now is called a bowline. A skiff nudged in, the kind they rent to visitors who pretend to like rowing. The man rowing wasn't a visitor. He had the posture of someone who has opinions about oarlocks. He wore a weathered cap and a windbreaker, and he smiled like a man who had kept secrets without resenting them. He shipped the oars and nodded like they'd rehearsed this hello. "Afternoon, Lena," he said. Mara didn't flinch. "I told you not here," she answered quietly. "Not now." He glanced at me like I was a chair. "We're early," he said. "Weather's coming in. Watch says Wednesday, so Wednesday is now." Mara stood, wiped her hands on her jeans, and recognized my face. "Owen," she said, in the voice she uses when she's deciding how much truth I can digest. "This is Jack." "Jason," the man corrected pleasantly, as if it didn't matter. "Jason helps people launch," she said swiftly. "He makes sure no one drowns learning what not to do." "Good to meet you," Jason said to me, and I noticed his hands, the small nabbed scars people get from rope and hooks and decisions they were late to. "Launch what?" I asked, thinking docks and boats, pretending I was thinking only docks and boats. "Choices," he said, like a joke, and looked at the water. We stood there, the 3 of us, in the friendly silence of strangers who just realized they'll need to agree on a story. In the end, Jason pushed off, oars dipping like punctuation, and Mara wrapped the line once around the cleat and stood with her back to me the way someone stands when they're measuring a shore they can't see yet. That night I said lightly, "You're popular," and she pretended to hear "I love you" and answered that instead. We ate pasta. We fixed the wobbly leg on the porch chair. We slept. The lid stayed on. The following Wednesday, I came home to find the anchor gone. There's a stupid flavor of jealousy that thinks inventory is proof. I went to the boathouse and looked for other changes. Rope length, the launch dolly's angle, the way the canoe's bow faced. It felt like counting footprints in our own kitchen. I put the padlock on and locked it and realized, too late, that someone had filed its innards just enough so any key would take it. Or maybe that's how old padlocks are, and I was learning more than I wanted to. I told myself again that it was fine, that she had a volunteer thing, that I was being the kind of man my father had hated in himself, suspicious because he was afraid of needing too much. That night, when Mara brushed her teeth, she hummed the same little tune she'd hummed moving in. It bothered me now, the way a clock's tick bothers you once you've noticed it. The next morning, a letter waited in our mailbox with no return address. Inside, a folded photocopy of a county permit, boat ramp, improvements. On the bottom, a sticky note. R14 locker. Keep dry. Wednesday only. The handwriting was careful, practiced, not trying to hide, but used to not being looked at. The metal tag in our drawer pulsed in my memory like a small coin. I asked Reed, over fence line and small talk, if the marina had lockers. Yeah, he said. Rainy day storage for rich folks' toys and poor folks' emergencies. He scratched his chin. And for people who don't want to forget what they shouldn't have remembered. He didn't ask why I was asking. That's how kindness works in places where lakes teach you about discretion. That afternoon, while Mara was at the clinic, I drove to the marina. The office smelled like old paper, fries, and the kind of soap you buy by the gallon. A teenager with a summer job face looked up from a stool. His name tag said, Hayden. His posture said, please don't give me anything complicated. I need to check locker R14, I said, casual as I could make it. You got the tag? He asked. I held it up and braced for a question. He just nodded like I had shown him my library card. Driftwood building, he said, pointing. Second row, third door, green latch, it sticks. It did. Inside were 2 plastic bins with tight lids, a galvanized lantern with a mantle that looked new, and a waterproof bag with a roll top. I didn't open the bins. I told myself that was because I trusted my wife. I told myself that so many times my mouth started to taste like tin. I took the bag and the lantern and left the bins. At home, I put the bag on the kitchen table and stood over it like a man who thinks maybe if he stares long enough, the contents will explain themselves before he learns the wrong thing. When you've spent years giving numbers to things, curiosity learns the weight of your hands. I undid the clip and opened the roll. Inside, a phone in a zip case, a spiral notebook matching the boathouse one, a narrow envelope with Hannah written on it, and a small sliver of driftwood with a notch in the end, like a key without the metal. The phone was off. The notebook's top page read, Wednesday, Cove Lantern, leave by 2015. The envelope contained a list of towns around the lake with arrows next to some, and a single initial for each, S, T, J, M. There were no last names. The driftwood piece had the smell of old fire. I put everything back exactly as it was and zipped the case and rolled the bag and reclipped it and put it under the sink, because the undersink cabinet is where you put unclassified danger in a marriage. That night, I made pan-fried trout and set the table and tried to be a person you confide in. Mara came in with wind color on her cheeks and a tired joy in her mouth. How was the clinic? I asked. She told me a story about a man whose finger she wrapped and whose gratitude scared her because it sounded like a prayer. I told her about a change order that surprised no one and how the contractor was pretending it was my fault the soil had water in it. She laughed exactly where people are supposed to laugh around me. When we were done, she reached into the undersink cabinet and took out a towel and didn't see the bag because she wasn't looking for it. Later, when we lay in bed with the windows cracked open to let the lake make the room a little less ours, I said, Who's Hannah? She turned her head on the pillow and looked at me like she was deciding which door to choose in a house I hadn't been invited to. Someone I used to be, she said. Is she around? She's quieter now. Is she here on Wednesdays? She didn't answer for a long minute that belonged to the insects. I help, she said finally. People who can't get what they need. The lake is a good place to pass things without making it a big performance. Pass what? I asked, like a man trying to keep his voice on the road when the tires hit gravel. Refills, she said softly. Inhalers, insulin, a phone card so a woman can call a number without her husband seeing it in the log, a bus ticket, a list of women physicians within a radius of a new address. Information is a commodity here, Owen. You know this. Why the names that aren't your name? Because some kinds of helping look like accusing if the wrong person is watching. She traced a line on the sheet with her finger like it was a map. If you want the truth, I started before we moved. The lake makes it easier to keep safe. And Jason? He doesn't judge the current. You trust him? I trust that he trusts the water not to lie. There's an argument you have with yourself where you line up all the noble versions of a person you love and then shove the uneasy shadows to the back. I gave her a long chamber to tell me a story that let me stay the man I wanted to be. She told it. We fell asleep. The next week, a storm came down like a decision. It turned the lake into a language you don't speak. Wednesday wore a Thursday's anger. The wind peeled paint from things that thought it couldn't. At dusk, as if reading from the same page again, a small boat materialized in the sleet like stubbornness. Jason, hat tight, shoulders set. Mara stood on the dock in a rain shell and an expression I had never seen fully formed on her face. It was not fear. It was not joy. It was the look of a person who has been waiting to pick up a weight she knows is hers. You shouldn't go, I said, voice too loud in the wind. Not going, she said, is how people learn to die alone. I wanted to follow. The skiff was too small. The lake was too much. Be back by 9, I said. It was nothing like a rule. It was a superstition, like kissing a photo before a flight. She squeezed my wrist. If the porch light is on, she said, I'll knock. If it's off, I'll let myself in. What does that mean? It means we're making two kinds of safety. She smiled thinly, disappointed in the language available to us. You taught me that with the boilers. I stood on the dock until they vanished into the gray, the lantern hissing in Jason's bow like a private star. At 8:34 p.m., the power flickered. The porch light went out on its own. The house inhaled wrong and then remembered. I stood in the kitchen with a battery lamp and counted my breathing until it sounded like counting. At 9:12, the back door opened and closed and water hit the mat and a body moved through the mudroom with the care of someone trying not to bring the lake in with them. Mara, I said. You were right about the knot, she answered from the dark. Bowline saves your life when your hands forget their names. She smelled like river rock and metal. I put my hands on her shoulders and felt her shake, not from fear, but from the friction of running a battery down to 0 and asking it for 1% more anyway. She took a shower long enough to make steam collect on the mirror like erasable fate. We didn't speak until her hand stopped. Then she said, A girl named Marley could breathe tonight because the system I'd like to admire didn't mind being supplemented. Please don't hate me for being immoderate about who gets to live. I don't. I said. I don't know what I feel. Start with tired, she said. We can build on that. Things should have gotten simpler after a confession like that. They didn't. The lake gave back other names. Strangers waved at her with the recognition you save for beloved cousins. A man on a bike near the general store said, Hannah, you still owe me $20, with a smile. She laughed and said, Put it on account. And his face softened the way men's faces soften when a woman says things in a tone that doesn't scratch their pride. One evening in July, during the kind of heat that makes the lake smell like green metal, I came home to find a woman sitting on our steps like she had been poured there and allowed to cool. She was mid-40s, jeans and boots that had learned more about errands than fashion. She stood when I approached and offered a hand like we were neighbors not yet introduced. You're Owen, she said. I'm Ruth. Tell your wife I'm sorry I didn't come sooner. She'll know why. She's at the clinic, I said. Ruth nodded. I'll come back, she said. Tell her Wednesday is too late. She walked down the drive like the ground remembered the weight of her. When Mara got home, hair flattened by a day that didn't allow for resting, I told her. The color left and then returned to her face in a pattern I wished I could name. Okay, she said. We need to go to R14. We? I asked. Yes, she said. You're right that I have 2 names here. It's time for one of them to be yours. A little. We drove to the marina in a soft storm. The Driftwood building had a new lock. Not the green latch Hayden had promised would stick, but a brand new cylinder with crisp edges. The tag worked anyway. Inside, the bins I'd left closed, now joined by a third, and a stack of paper-wrapped parcels the size of paperback books. Mara moved like a person who knew exactly what was hers and what wasn't. "Open 2, she said. Inside the bin, rows of labeled vials and small, hard plastic crates of inhalers, each with a pharmacy sticker peeled off like an old name you don't use anymore. In the lid, a list with initials and dosing instructions in the tidy, narrow hand. Ruth was on it. R, 10U, X 3 days. Meet at Stone. "What's Stone?" I asked. She smiled at me with exhausted fondness. "The big one," she said. "Every lake has one." We met Ruth at a boulder on the North Shore the next afternoon. I carried the bag. Mara carried conversation. Ruth's eyes were bright with a kind of gratitude that doesn't do compliments. She hugged Mara in a way women hug women when they have seen each other in worse rooms. "You're good," she said, "but you're not invincible." She cut a glance at me. "Get him to teach you about not being invincible." "I'm here for the part where we admit how many things can break," I said, and meant it. The days after that had an angle. We still fixed trim. We still went to Hannon's. We still made a deck plan we might never price out. But Wednesdays had a hum, and sometimes it followed us into Thursday. I worked. Mara worked. People arrived at dusk and left, always pausing before turning their blinkers on, as if using a signal would identify them. Jason returned and returned. There were nights the porch light meant safe, and nights it meant sorry, not tonight. I learned the language slowly. It learned me back. And then, August. The heat had stayed longer than its invitation. The water level dropped low enough the rocks began gossiping. On a Monday morning, the clinic called. "Mara's out sick?" the receptionist said, cheerfully confused. "She said she left you a note." She hadn't. She didn't come home that afternoon, or that night. The under-sink bag was gone, which I'd expected, and the boathouse padlock was on but not locked. Her phone sat on the desk like a quiet witness with no jurisdiction. The cameras showed nothing but wind and a cat's tail that didn't belong to us. At 2:17 a.m., the landline rang once. A minute later, it rang again. On the third ring, I answered. The line carried lake sound, a tiny hiss, a tick, no voice. "Mara," I said, which was a request and a ritual. A breath, maybe. Or maybe I made the breath because I needed to eat. In the morning, a postcard lay on the porch mat. A photograph of our lake from decades ago when the trees were smaller and the boathouse roof pitched different. No return address. On the back, in tidy hand. "If the water is flat, bring the lantern. If the water is loud, stay home." I checked the water. It was glass. I took the lantern because I don't know how to be the kind of man who ignores instructions when they line up with love. I rowed to the cove. No one waited. The far shore held its breath. I set the lantern on the thwart and let it burn. At 9:06 p.m., a skiff slipped out from behind the point. It was Jason. Alone. He tied up without looking at me and held out a paper-wrapped parcel the size of a paperback. "For Ruth," he said. "Where's Mara?" He didn't answer. He looked past me into a middle distance I didn't like. "The water remembers," he said. "If you don't like what it says, ask it a different question." "I'm asking you." "She knows how to answer for herself." "Is she?" I couldn't say the word. He shook his head once. Relief kicked me in the back of the knees. "You can leave the light on," he added, getting back in. "Or you can turn it off. That part's yours." He rowed. I watched the lantern burn down, mantle crumbling in on itself delicately until it died and the night pulled itself closer. The next afternoon, Reed wandered over, holding 2 beers, pretending to be a man bringing beers when he was actually a man checking if another man was standing upright. "Heard the clinic called," he said. "You okay?" No, I said. It felt good to chop the word. He sat. We drank. We said nothing for a lake-sized amount of time. Finally, he said, Lena's one of the good ones. I married Amara, I said. He nodded like that made sense. Some folks here have two names, lake names, land names. I can't tell you how to hold them both without dropping one. I can tell you that pretending there aren't two is how you get hurt. She left, I said. She went, he said. There's a difference. He looked toward the water. Watch for the rock, he added. The one that looks like a loaf of bread when the water's down. If there's a ribbon on it, she's asking you to wait. If there's not, she's asking you to choose. I don't have a ribbon, I said. That's one way of choosing. For a week, the lake spoke in riddles. Postcards arrived on no schedule. One showed a road to the next town, empty, August sun making mirage. On the back, in the same neat hand, buy bread, leave half. I left a loaf at the boathouse. Someone took it. Another card, a photograph of a lantern, hand-drawn, detail too careful to be nothing. Back. Don't fix what the lake is trying to teach you. I went 3 days without sleeping properly. I took the parcel to Ruth, and she cried like a faucet turned politely low. She's alive, I said. It sounded like a request. She's busy, Ruth said. Is that better? It's a kind of better. A man from a number I didn't recognize called one afternoon. We're collecting for the volunteer fire, he said. You new folks make a donation? His voice shifted halfway through the sentence, the way voices do when the script falls off the table. Tell Hannah we have the lantern, he added, and hung up. On a Tuesday evening, the rock loaf had a ribbon, red, tied like a promise. I sat on the porch and watched it until dusk and then a little after, like a person who loves a flag enough to keep it company when the wind stops. I stayed. Nothing happened. The ribbon grew heavy and fell against the rock's hip like a tired arm. On Thursday, the ribbon was gone. I don't know what the right move was. I know what I did. I took the R14 tag and the bag and the notebook and the lantern and put them in a box. I wrote on the box in Sharpie, House. I slid it onto the high shelf in the hall closet, the one you need a chair for. I put a spare key under the third board like it belonged there. I left the porch light on. That night at 2:14 a.m., the landline rang once, then again. On the third ring, I answered and said nothing. Neither did the other end. We breathed. That was enough, or the closest available version of enough. A week later, a package arrived with no return address. Inside, the black notebook I'd seen once and lost, a new lantern mantle, and a photograph of our house taken from the water at night. The porch light was on. In the reflected window, two silhouettes overlapped for a moment, and then separated like a tide. On the back of the photo, some names float, some sink. The ones worth keeping, learn to do both. No signature, no promises, just a sentence and a picture and a mantle I could choose to install or not. I keep the notebook on the top shelf. I change the mantle. I buy bread on Wednesdays because sometimes a ritual is the only thing that makes a room not feel like an accident. Reed and I talk about boats in a way that means we're talking about boats and also not at all. Ruth leaves apples in a brown paper bag on our porch. One time she wrote, "For Owen," on the top, and the letters looked like Care trying to learn cursive. Sometimes when the lake is flat and the air is the color cameras like, a skiff comes close, not tying up, not greeting, just ghosting through the cove like a bookmark left in a chapter you're not done with. I stand on the dock with the lantern unlit and the porch light on, and I let the water decide how much honesty we can afford that night. People ask, the few who know enough to think they have the right, if she's coming back. As if there's a back to come to when a person has learned how to be two names at once. I say, the house still says ours when the wood creaks, which is true. I say, the water remembers, which is also true. I don't say what I say to the dark when the phone rings once at 2:15 and the lantern's mantle is new. You can be who you need to be. I know how to wait without breaking. I keep a second toothbrush in the cup. I oil the boathouse hinge so it doesn't argue with night. I've stopped checking the marina locker, which feels like an achievement and a failure in equal measure. The tag R14 sits on the windowsill by the sink, catching the morning in a way that makes dishwater look like a decision. The lake has started its September costume. More silver, less green. Geese practice exits in the evening. I stay. Some mornings the fog lifts quick, and the shore across is sharp enough to count trees. Some mornings it refuses, and I live in a snow globe of unmade choices. The water holds both perfectly well. I am learning. If she walked up the dock right now, I don't know which name I'd say first. That might be the point. Not that she returns or doesn't, but that I've finally accepted how many truths can sit in a room without breaking the chair. The water remembers. The house forgives what it can. The lantern is ready. And every Wednesday, without looking to see if anyone's watching, I leave half a loaf of bread in the boathouse and turn the porch light on.